All right, what do you guys want? Well, since I can't have any fun, sit back, relax, and kiss her childhood goodbye. Just so we're clear.
Illuminating television.
Now you may be wondering, why Jim Henson, you ask? Because that's where it all began. The main man responsible, Peter Orton, would collaborate with Jim Henson at the CTW. This collaboration would make the duo good friends during and after the distribution of Sesame Street in 1987. After some time at CTW, would aim to divide distributions to expand the brand. Peter would then become the CEO of Henson International TV, which would become the new distribution wing of Jim Henson Productions. Jim would then negotiate with the Walt Disney Company to fund the company fully. Peter would want something much different than to be under Disney, and those who were at HIT would want to be spun off as its own independent distribution. By 1989, Jim would agree to Peter conducting a management buyout of the distribution company and would rename it as HIT Communications PLC. After HIT was fully established, there was a downturn in the beginning of the company. Because of the buyout, no Henson IPs were transferred over. However, that wouldn't stop the company from seeking out IPs to distribute. HIT would aim for international shows. It would land 2 productions from Alvin and the Chipmunks from Bagdasarian Productions and Postman Pat from Woodland Animations in the 1990s. By 91, it would take on 23% stock in Flextech, a British satellite cable and television operator, at £600,000, while also garnering distribution rights to Captain Z in the Z-Zone, Where's Wally, Peter Rabbit, and The Wind in the Willows. Fast forward to 1992 would be the parent company of the most popular preschool show in America and internationally. The show was made by a mom, Cheryl Leach of Dallas, Texas, after her son would grow tired of We Sing, a video series that would also have its own line of CDs, videos, and cassette tapes. After seeing that her son was not stimulated by the visuals of the songs, she would make to create her own characters that engaged her son's interests. Leach would then make a team to create her own line of children's home videos. After some time, Barney and the Backyard Gang was created on August 19th of 1988 as the first installment to the franchise. Made by Bates Baltez and Philip Parker, the video series would have NBC shows the Hogan family actress Sandy Duncan as Amy and Michael's mother. The first song was Friends Are Forever for 5 videos, and then I Love You was the next song to be made and was sung in replacement for the intro song. The song was so popular that the producers and music composer Lori Lazarus would change the song to be sung at the end of Barney Goes to School. The show did well in the state of Texas, but struggled in views domestically, until Larry Rifkin, executive for Connecticut Public Television, would rent the Barney videos for his daughter. His daughter would love the whole series so much that Larry would want to pitch it to PBS. Larry also thought that Barney as a character was a more feasible and a less neurotic character than Big Bird from Sesame Street. The executive would then go to President Jerry Franklin, and he would let his son watch the series, which came back a big success with his son loving the show. Before giving a show a green light to be made, both parties would have a mock trial with a crowd of preschool kids. The test unanimously came back with the kids wanting more Barney. Shaw would then give over the show to be revamped by executives and in return would name the show Barney and Friends, which would air in 1992 under CPTV and Lyric Studios. With the success of Barney on PTV, PBS decided to do one thing with the show: defund it. Not even joking. Because PBS decided after 30 episodes of a successful show, it would not provide funding for long-term seasons.
Money!
Granted, they did the same thing with Sesame Street, but that didn't work out so well. This would anger parents and kids of the Barney fan club to write letters to PBS, even going as far as station executives being furious at PBS for aiming to cancel one of their successful shows on daytime primetime television, rivaling certain networks. This would be called by Larry, quote, the Barney insurrection. I'm making a disclaimer on this video. I am very apolitical on this channel, and I'm going to continue to be that way. Now, go look this up. This actually was called an insurrection by Larry, okay? I'm just relaying the message. That's all I'm doing. PBS would eventually fold and refund Barney for more seasons. Barney and Friends would continue to be recorded in Dallas, while in the later seasons would be moved over to Irving and Carlton, Texas. Just keep a bookmark here on this one. HIT would then create HIT Wildlife, which would create nature shows and be responsible for 35% of company revenue alongside the success of Barney. Fast forward to 96, HIT would create HIT Home Video after using funds from AIM, while at the same time looking to create their next successful IP. Enter Keith Chapman to create No, we can't. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. Anyway, moving right along. Keith Chapman would be a freelancer for the Jim Henson Company and worked on designs for the Muppets. Eventually, he would leave the company to pursue advertising work. In the early 90s, Keith would be inspired by construction sites and looking at a JCB backhoe loader. He would aim to bring the construction site to life. At the time, it was only going to be construction vehicles with different personalities, until he realized that the machines needed an operator for them. Thus, Bob was born. Although the creation of Scoop was much earlier than Bob himself. During the creative process, he would give his idea over to executive chairman Peter Orton. Peter in return would love the idea and get on board with making Bob into a success. Peter would make a deal to have the IP rights to Bob the Builder in exchange for title rights and copyright to merchandise. Bob the Builder would then be made into stop motion animation by Hot Animation. Over time, Bob the Builder would be a huge hit with over £1 billion in revenue from international sales. Keep a second bookmark here. By 97, HIT would move into having its own stock in the London Stock Exchange, which would help jumpstart new original shows, which mainly were doing IPs that were from children's books such as Percy the Park Keeper, Bramley Hedge, and Kipper. Fast forward to 98, HIT Entertainment would develop Hot Animation, the stop-motion animation company to produce Bob the Builder, while in addition signing Kipper internationally to Nickelodeon, Bramley and Percy over to Stars and Encore, Anthony Ant to HBO Family, and Wyland's Ocean World to Animal Planet. While in the US, Kipper would be loved by millions of kids and win the 98 BAFTA award. In 99, HIT would debut Bob the Builder, while Mattel would sign on Angelina Ballerina. This would be the start of many problems down the line with Mattel, so just keep watching. HIT Entertainment would be signing on a lot of IP works, while Bob the Builder would carry the company, would run into Britt Alcroft, who would have various IPs, Sooty, Captain Pugwash, and the most critically acclaimed IP, buckle up, this might take the whole video.
Oswald.
Before we even get into Britt Alcroft, we have to go back here. The main creator of the character, Thomas the Tank Engine, was Wilbert Awdry. Growing up, he would be from a family of railroad constructors. In his childhood years, he would say that steam engines in his imagination would have different personalities when it came to the engines and how they would communicate regarding horns and braking engines. Later in life, would graduate in theology from St. Peter's Hall and Wycliffe Hall. He was ordained as an Anglican cleric at the Church of England and would become a priesthood at various English clergies later on. He would retire and marry his wife Margaret Whale. Now, you may be wondering, why does any of this matter? Well, now we get into the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. The early Thomas the Tank Engine came into existence in 1942 after his son Christopher Awdry would have a battle with measles. To amuse his son and keep him distracted, he would create a book called The Three Railway Engines, as well as a prototype of Thomas called Edward, made out of scrap wood and a broomstick. True story. As he loved the characters, Chris would want more characters to be made. However, due to supply shortages, Wilbert would not have enough materials to make new characters at the time. In addition, Thomas was a name and story Chris wanted more of. The Three Railway Engines would be published in 1945 and would have a 26-story series. While this would gain traction, no pun intended, Wilbert would also be a part of the transition from diesel to steam trains during the reconstruction of the English railway system. Later illustrations of Thomas were from Reginald Payne and designed as a Billiton 060T and later an E2 engine. By 1953, the book series editor Eric Marriott would be approached by the BBC. Network pitches were to use live-action trains to recreate the Railroad series books. This would go and develop into the pilot series made by Lime Grove Studios, and that would not pan well at all. The show would fail miserably, and live trains would derail and would have to be fixed by the crew, which Awdry would call, quote, unprofessional. Channel. This would cancel the show on June 28th of 1953. BBC in turn would give creative freedom to the authors and would eventually decline and keep Thomas as a book for the next 20 years. By 1973, Andrew Weber would try to make a musical series out of Thomas, and Audrey would disagree with it as he would think once it went to America, it would be corrupted. Now we get into Britt Allcroft. In 1979, Britt Allcroft, who would at the time be a television producer and avid train enthusiast, would create train documentaries and would eventually come across the Railroad series, and as she put it, quote, "There was something in the series I felt I could develop that would connect with children. I saw a strong emotional content that would carry with little children's experiences with life." She would then go to Wilbert about making the character into a cartoon series, and with a pitch as well as funding, Audrey would let Allcroft purchase the rights to Thomas for £50,000 at the time. So those who thought she made Thomas the Tank Engine, she did not. However, she will be held in high regard to the main show series. So, just saying that for the audience. Britt would, however, have a problem. In order to get the IP, would make her get a second mortgage on her house until finding a bank manager to give her a personal loan to complete her funding. After the money was raised, she assembled a crew to make the production happen, ranging from Robert D. Cardona, David Mitton, and musicians Junior Carnbell and Mike O'Donnell. The show in 1984 during Series 1 would be produced by Clearwater Features Ltd. and ITV. Both live action and stop motion were used for Thomas and the real characters. However, stop motion was used whenever the trains or conductors were moving from set to set. Later on, the series would be adapting the book series from book number 9 to book number 30. Christopher Audrey would also have certain creative requests to make sure that the show followed the book in its entirety. While Thomas the Tank Engine was being made a success in the UK, the US would get an adaptation known as Shining Time Station in 1989. Fun facts, plural. The theme song for Thomas the Tank Engine was created with the Roland Jupiter 6 and Emu Protus, and was rumored to be recorded at Ringo Starr's studio, who was also an actor for the show from Series 1 to Series 3. Wilbert Audrey would later pass away on March 21st of 1997, and Christopher would still oversee Britt on making the series, while Britt Allcroft would later in the series create the Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I know, in the 2000s. That movie would not go well in the box office, making $19.7 million domestically. Ironically, the movie would do well with young audiences. Britt would step down from her company due to this failure, while in addition, failing to make a deal with Hit Entertainment at the time. This would not be the end of them getting the IP, however. By December, Hit would partner with Lyric Studios to distribute Kipper and Bob the Builder, and would later purchase the company for $275 billion. Later in 2001, would sign a deal with Sears to sell the Bob the Builder merchandise, while at the same time, the Jim Henson Company would be in financial trouble with its main company, EMTV, for buying and losing 50% stock in Formula One racing. Hit, in return, would help the Jim Henson Company, while in October, Hit would be in bids for Pingu. The creator Otmar Gutman at the time would be the lead animator to Lucy and the Menace of the Street and Frederick and Frederi. Later on would make a cartoon that was like Pingu, but only had sea lions instead of penguins. Then would meet Erica Brueggemann at Schweizer Furnishing and create Pingu after saying that the mock penguin designs he did were better than the sea lions. Erica also stated that the character should walk upright, so quote, "Why not a penguin?" Otmar would disagree due to how they moved due to the characters being made out of plasticine, which the whole show was made out of. Erica would convince Otmar more and more into having a production team to create a 7-minute pilot in 1986. By 1987, the Pingu pilot would be screened at the Berlin Film Festival, and critics would have positive critiques about the pilot, leading them to win the Kleiner Bayer Award. Fast forward to 98, would start the production at Trick Film Studios in Resiken, Switzerland, on 5-minute episodes with a 25-minute special on SFDRS. Voice acting and story were performed on retroscript, which is a form of improv and voiced by Carlo Bonomi. The Penguinese language used was also a form of Grammarly, a form of mind language. By 93, David Hasselhoff would love the show so much, he would create the Pingu rap. Seriously. This song would only be aired in Switzerland until it would be redubbed in the international showings of Pingu. In 96, Pingu was well loved in Japan by Japanese high school girls, and still to this day has a cult following and airs on children's television. In 2001, Hit Entertainment would buy out the Pingu IP for £15.9 million and extend this series for another 52 episodes. Hot Animation would also take over the animation production and use Rising Cast as the old puppets that were made of plasticine deteriorated deteriorated after years of use. Fast forward to April 2002, Parthenon Entertainment would get 300 catalogs of wildlife content from a buyout from Hit Wildlife. In August, Hit would then purchase Golaine Entertainment after Britt Allcroft would step down from our own company and Wilbert Aldridge's passing, and finally secure Thomas and Friends as well as Fireman Sam and the Adventures of Mumfree for £135 million, while at the same time establishing in Canada. By March of 2003, CCI would end its deal with Hit Entertainment and take half of its catalog back, while only creating one original show, Rubber Dubbers. Fast forward to 2004, Hit Entertainment would take charge of distribution of the Jim Henson Company IPs such as The Hoobs, Fraggle Rock, Emmett Otter, and Francis. In October, would announce in conjunction with PBS, Sesame Workshop, and Comcast to create the 24-hour network PBS Kids Sprout. Now, before anybody says anything, I know I saw the votes. In the same month would fire Rob Laws. Hit would then for the next 2 years stay independent until March 22nd of 2005. Apex Partners would change the whole landscape of the company as a whole, buying out the whole operation as well as IPs for £489.4 million. Months later would launch PBS Kids Sprout with its conglomerates and air many Hit Entertainment IPs on the channel exclusively. By February 2006, it would end production of its own DVDs and distributions in the United States and not in the UK. Hit instead signed with 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. This would bring Hit to 70,000 retail stores in distribution. Eventually would end the deal with 20th and sign on to Lionsgate Entertainment. Later on in 2007 would end up getting S4C 50% stock for Fireman Sam and would retain the Welsh language as an agreement to S4C. Months later partnered with Cello Media to launch the Jim Jam channel, while also making the Hit Toy Company. By October 2007, Hit Entertainment would put Sudi up for sale after failing to make a new series for ITV. Bridge Films and Sudi Limited were both put up for sale in years' time. Britt Allcroft would reacquire The Magic Adventures of Mumfree in March 2008. Months later, Richard Cadell would purchase the IP rights to Sudi, while at the same time would hire Nickelodeon executive Jeffrey D. Dunn, who was responsible for the DVD distribution rights being bought over from the 20th Century to Lionsgate Entertainment. Dunn was also responsible for the creation of new characters like Mike the Knight. Hit Entertainment would sell off the Guinness Book of World Records IP, as well as sell Golaine Entertainment to Ripley Entertainment. Jump to March 2009, Hit would hire Julia Pistor to launch Hit Movies in Los Angeles. By this time, Hit Movies would be aiming to make movie adaptations to existing IPs such as Thomas and Friends. Now I'll go as far as to say Mattel was in early IP deals with Hit Entertainment, but by this time would be when Mattel would sink its teeth into Hit. But here's how they did so. In 2010, Mattel would sign on to purchasing the rights to Thomas and Friends and would make toys after the purchase. The Jim Jam channel would also be dropped by Hit at the same time. Fast forward to 2011, Fireman Sam would top the top 10 best-selling kids toys in the UK. Mike the Knight, made in partnership with Nelvana and airing on Treehouse, was aired. In the same year, Apex would sell Hit in two separate ways: to sell Thomas and Friends with PBS Kids Sprout stock along with the catalogs, or one by one. Many buyers came forward, ranging from Disney, Saban, Mattel, Hasbro, Viacom, and Classic Media. Guess who won? Hit Entertainment would be bought by Mattel as agreed by Apex Partners for $680 million, but did not give over PBS Kids stock. Managed by Fisher-Price, the takeover of Hit was complete by February 12th of 2012. As Mattel saw the huge success of Thomas and Friends, it only saw to buy that IP itself and sell everything else off. However, had a second change of heart as most of the catalog was bringing in revenue, even after many seasons ended. By 2014, Universal Pictures Home Entertainment would strike a deal with Hit and would then distribute remastered DVDs of Hit's old IPs. Later in 2015, Thomas the Tank Engine would get a theme park from Ednaville, USA in South Carver, Massachusetts. Later in October, would get the 9-story media group to reboot both Angelina Ballerina and Barney. In 2016, Hit would eventually turn into Mattel Creations. And that's all she wrote, because I have to do a Mattel video later on. The history of Hit Entertainment is a vast one, rising from knowing many heavy hitters to taking chances on independent creations. Hit could have seen a longer run had it stayed independent. However, it wasn't going to be the case, as Barney was the first successful IP in its catalog to turn the tide on how the company would see other creations. But by not relying heavily on owning other IPs and distributing them is what made the company timeless. Not only this, having its own preschool characters to compete on a larger scale. Over time, it was bound to see another company taking it over. It was never too big to fail. However, the brand was branching out in territories that weren't just about media distribution. It seems fitting that Mattel took it over, seeing that Hit Entertainment itself was in the toy business. It was on top of animation studios that didn't do the same thing or needed a parent channel to sell the merchandise. Hit, even to this day, is beloved by so many domestically and internationally, and even with Mattel keeping it going, it may not be for our generation, but it still holds many of the IPs that are still being rebooted to future generations. Whether we like it or not, Mattel owns Hit, and maybe in the future it won't screw up a bunch of IPs. Just sell a whole bunch of toys. I mean, that fixes the problem.
Epilogue.
Well, at least that's over.
It's a show about nothing. How do we know when it's over?
I do.